Welcome back, part 15 of 21. We've built the brains of the operation. Now let's talk about the shield. Why does the Quran tell the believers to be firm or hard? In a world that values vague kindness, Parwez explains why the law must have teeth to protect the weak.
It's a heavy topic today.
Yeah, it really is. And to wrap our heads around this, we really have to imagine the morning after a revolution.
Right, like the hangover phase of changing society.
Exactly. Like, think about any massive historical upheaval, the French Revolution, the Arab Spring, or, even just a huge corporate restructuring.
The honeymoon phase is always amazing, right? People are shoulder to shoulder.
Shouting slogans, talking about tearing down the corrupt system.
Yeah.
Everyone's a hero in the public square.
But then Monday morning arrives.
Right. The dust settles, and suddenly you're not tearing down a system anymore. You have to actually build one.
Which is significantly less glamorous.
Oh, totally. Because building a system means taxation. It means defense forces. People actually have to leave their comfortable homes and do the grueling, boring work of running a state.
And that transition is, statistically speaking, the most dangerous period for any movement.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we're stepping into a really dense philosophical lecture from 1985 by Ghulam Ahmad Parwez.
Yeah, he's focusing on Surah At-Tawbah here, verses 90 through 99.
Right. And we are going to fundamentally rewire how you, the listener, think about boundaries. We're looking at the anatomy of hypocrisy and this really provocative idea that true mercy actually requires an unyielding, predictable framework of law.
Because, Parwez is basically doing a linguistic autopsy on human nature here. He's analyzing a community that survived the revolution but now has to pay the physical toll of establishing an order.
And he completely challenges our modern sensibilities, right? Like, we live in a world that thinks firmness equals cruelty.
Oh, absolutely. We equate softness with empathy.
But Parwez inverts that. He says, without a firm shield, your compassion is just a theory. It leaves the weak totally exposed.
Right. But before we even get to why the law needs teeth, we have to talk about how humans try to avoid the bite of reality.
Yes, the linguistic decay part. I found this fascinating.
It's so crucial. Parwez points out how revolutionary vocabulary gets corrupted over time. He draws this hard line between Deen and what we now call religion.
And we really need to clarify that gap. Because Deen, in this context, is not just, private spiritual rituals in your bedroom.
No, it's a living, breathing socio-economic and political system. It dictates justice, wealth circulation, everything.
Whereas religion is often just treated as a personal coping mechanism.
Exactly. And when an empire or a wealthy elite gets comfortable, they want to maintain the status quo, so they intentionally neuter the vocabulary of that system.
They strip the action out of the words, like the prime example he uses is jihad, right?
Yeah. The original meaning was a literal, real-world struggle. Using your money, your physical energy, your intellect to establish a fair society.
Right, physically standing between a marginalized group and an actual tyrant.
But over centuries, as the elite got super wealthy, that definition became very inconvenient.
Obviously.
Yeah.
If jihad means I have to give up my hoarded wealth or risk my life, I'm not going to like that if I'm comfortable.
So they didn't abandon the religion. They just changed the dictionary.
Wow.
Yeah, mystics and comfortable philosophers rebranded it as Jihad-i-Akbar, the greater struggle.
Which they defined as just a purely internal, meditative battle against the ego, right?
Exactly. And Parwez uses this incredible mirror analogy here. He says the Quran is a mirror held up to society.
Okay.
So you look in the mirror and you see a coward. Someone who won't sacrifice anything for the greater good.
That's some heavy cognitive dissonance.
Right. So you have two options. Do the agonizing work to change your behavior?
Or you break the mirror.
Spot on. Changing the definition of the word is breaking the mirror. Suddenly, meditating quietly makes you a saint, and you don't have to risk a thing.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. Isn't internal self-improvement inherently a good thing?
Sure.
Like battling your ego, being more patient. Why is Parwez so fiercely critical of this inner struggle? It feels, a bit dismissive.
Well, he's not dismissing psychological discipline. You need that. His critique is when that internal stuff is weaponized as an excuse to abandon the vulnerable in the real world.
Oh, I see.
That's the definition of nifaq, or hypocrisy here. It lets the elite feel spiritually superior without lifting a finger for society.
Like a corporate titan sitting in a climate-controlled room writing poetry about his inner demons, while his business practices are literally crushing the working class.
Exactly. It's designer spirituality. Zero risk to your bank account, zero risk to your safety.
You just get to be admired as a peaceful ascetic while the world burns.
Right. And so hypocrisy, Mifak, is way more than just telling a lie.
It's the measurable gap between your grand claims of belief and your actual willingness to pay the price for it.
Which forces us to redefine what faith even is. Parwez argues that in the Quranic context, faith is a legally binding contract.
A literal transaction, like a business deal.
Basically, yeah, you're selling your life, your energy, and your wealth to the movement.
And in return, you're buying into systemic peace or paradise. But not just in the afterlife, right? Like actual security and justice here and now.
Exactly. So if you look at it through contract law, it removes all the emotional fluff.
I love this framing. Because if I sign a contract to buy a house and the seller signs the deed, but then I just refuse to wire the money.
You can't claim you're having a spiritual crisis.
Right. I'm in material breach of contract. I'm getting sued.
And Parwez applies that to societal mobilization. If the society needs your resources to defend its borders and you make excuses, you're breaking a legal agreement.
It's not just a personal failing. It's a structural betrayal. And the text gives this fascinating case study contrasting two groups who stayed behind during a major conflict.
Right. Group A and Group B.
Group A represents the hypocrites. These guys had the money, they had the health, they had everything. But they showed up with an endless list of super articulate excuses.
Oh, my house might get robbed. Or the weather's just too severe right now.
But the really insidious part isn't just the excuses, it's what they did after. They stayed home and formed this toxic home front.
Parwez compares them to a malicious tailor.
Oh, right, because a good tailor fixes a tear in a garment.
Yeah, but these guys act like the anti-tailor. They look for any frayed thread in the social fabric, a delayed supply line, a rumor, and they actively pull on it to rip the community apart.
Just sitting in the city squares, spreading cynicism. I warned you this was a bad idea. We're all going to die. Active sabotage of morale.
And they wrap it up as just being realistic. But Parwez immediately contrasts them with Group B, which brings us to the emotional core of verse 92.
Yes, Group B. These were the people who genuinely, physically could not participate. They had no horses, no armor, no money.
But they desperately wanted to fulfill their contract. They begged the leadership to go.
And when they were told there were no supplies for them, the text says they turned back with their eyes overflowing with tears.
And the linguistic breakdown of those tears is just incredible. Parwez contrasts two words, kauf and huzen.
Right, so the Group A hypocrites were motivated by kauf, which is fear. Specifically, fear of an external threat.
Fear of losing their money or their lives. Total self-preservation.
But Group B's tears were hose.
Yeah. Huzen is this crushing, profound internal sorrow. It's the grief of utter helplessness when you are completely invested in an outcome.
And Parwez grounds this with that day laborer analogy, which is just gut-wrenching.
It really is. Imagine a guy waking up before dawn in a really poor city. He promises his kids he'll bring back food.
He goes to the pavement where the contractors pick up workers. He just stands there in the dust.
A truck pulls up, picks 3 other guys, he waits. Another truck picks 2 younger guys.
The sun is beating down. Hours go by. And finally the market closes. There's no work.
Now imagine the physical weight of that walk home.
Oh, man. Opening the door, looking at his hungry kids and his hands are empty, and knowing he is completely, utterly helpless to fix it.
That sinking, suffocating weight in his chest, that is huzen.
That is the level of emotional investment true believers have. It wasn't just FOMO about a political event. It was devastating personal grief that they couldn't protect the vulnerable.
Which naturally bridges us to the core focus of the lecture.
Yeah.
The necessity of the shield.
Exactly. Because if you have citizens experiencing huzen because they care that much about the marginalized, you cannot govern that society with vague, boundaryless kindness.
Right. A soft system just fails those people. It needs an unyielding structure.
And the text talks about the Arab,
Right.
the desert-dwelling Bedouins. These guys were fierce. They'd fight a brutal blood feud for generations over a camel.
Yeah. Incredibly hardened warriors. But here's the contradiction. When asked to fight for an objective, abstract legal principle, they balked.
They recoiled. Why?
Because they were ignorant of hudud Allah, the limits of God, the permanent boundaries of the law.
Fighting for ego or loot is just the law of the jungle. It benefits the strongest guy.
Right. But fighting for a permanent rule that says you cannot exploit the weak, no matter how rich you are, that requires submitting your ego to a higher limit.
And this is where we have to clarify something really important for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Firmness isn't about cruelty. It's about predictability and deterrence.
Exactly.
If the law is soft, the exploiters will thrive. Because predators specialize in navigating gray areas.
Oh, 100%. They have the money to hire the lawyers, bribe the officials, manipulate the PR.
So for the law to actually protect a vulnerable person, it has to be an unyielding shield. It must have teeth.
It cannot flinch when a rich person breaks it.
Roxy, let's use an aviation analogy here. Think about air traffic control.
Okay, sure.
You've got thousands of massive metal tubes flying at hundreds of miles per hour. The only reason we have the freedom to fly safely is because the rules about altitude and speed are absolute.
Right, non-negotiable.
If an air traffic controller decides to be soft or kind to a tired pilot and lets him descend wherever, the result isn't a kinder system. The result is a mid-air collision.
Yeah, people die.
The extreme firmness of those boundaries guarantees safety. Demanding the freedom to ignore them just creates anarchy.
And that translates perfectly to socio-economic justice. Parwez actually uses this to critique absolute Western democracy.
Oh, this part was spicy.
Yeah, he compares it with the Islamic constitutional model. He argues that in a purely secular democracy, without hudud Allah, the law is entirely subjective.
It's just tethered to majority rule.
Right. A 51% majority can legally vote to crush the 49%. And because Parliament passed it, it's quote-unquote legal.
But wait, I have to challenge that. The whole point of a modern constitution is to protect minorities from mob rule, right? Like with the Supreme Court or a Bill of Rights.
True, but Parwez's distinction is about the ultimate source of authority. Human constitutions can be amended by human consensus.
Ah, so if society gets corrupt enough, they just vote to change the Bill of Rights.
Exactly. The Islamic model says true freedom needs a constitution with divine teeth, boundaries outside human jurisdiction.
Meaning no parliament or monarch can ever erase them. The law says even if 99% vote to exploit this group, it's illegal. This boundary is permanent.
So the firmness of the law guarantees compassion remains an institution, not just a passing political mood.
But that introduces a massive philosophical hurdle. If humans can't change the boundaries, who sets them?
Right. If it's just an arbitrary dictator in the sky, that's tyranny again.
Exactly. Which brings us to the concept of God as Hakim.
Hakim translates to wise or rational. Parwez points out that the Quran is super unique because it constantly gives the why behind its laws.
It doesn't just issue naked commands. It pairs the rule with hikmah, or wisdom.
Whereas a human dictator just says, because I said so and I have the army.
Right. But the divine law respects human intellect. The example the text uses is fasting.
Yeah, it doesn't just tell you to stop eating to make you suffer or prove your loyalty.
It explicitly says it's prescribed so that you develop taqwa, self-restraint, and systemic awareness.
The hunger builds psychological discipline and visceral empathy for people who are involuntarily starving.
It's a tool for human development. But if the laws are so rational and good for us, why do the hypocrites fight them so hard?
Because of the penalty mindset. Parwez calls it magrum.
Like an arbitrary fine or a tax.
Exactly. When asked to contribute time or money, they don't see it as an investment in society. They see it as a forced extraction.
It's exactly how a disgruntled driver views a speeding ticket. Just a financial loss to avoid.
Because they reject the why. They have zero ideological buy-in. They're entirely self-centric.
They might toss some money in because of peer pressure, but they're incredibly resentful.
The text actually says they secretly hope a vortex or whirlpool of destruction swallows the believers.
That is so dark. They feel imprisoned by the rules that are literally designed to keep them from descending into tribal warfare.
Because the boundary feels like a cage to them, not a shield.
So how do you actually motivate people then? If fear of a fine only works temporarily, how does this society get people to willingly sacrifice?
This brings in intangible rewards. True believers give because they seek korbat.
Closeness or elevation in the system.
Right. It's not about getting a building named after you. It's about drawing closer to the divine ideal and getting genuine appreciation from the leadership.
Which feels very connected to modern labor economics, like physical wages aren't enough to motivate humans long term.
No, we need what economists call psychological income.
Validation, purpose, feeling seen.
And Parwez notes a specific instruction given to the prophet. When people brought their contributions, he wasn't supposed to act like a tax collector.
He wasn't supposed to just hand out receipts.
No, he was explicitly commanded to actively validate them, pray for them, and show deep appreciation.
Because that psychological income turns a cold transaction into a nurturing relationship. It fuels growth.
Which introduces the most powerful metaphor in this whole lecture, the true nature of God as Rab and Rahim.
Rab meaning nurturer and Rahim meaning merciful.
Parwez completely upends traditional patriarchal imagery here. He says the divine dynamic isn't a king wanting tribute or a father wanting a return on his investment.
Right, because historically a father provides for a kid with the implicit deal that the kid takes care of him when he's old.
It's transactional, but Parwez compares the divine to a mother.
The ultimate non-transactional sacrifice. A mother sacrifices her blood, her calcium, her energy in the womb.
And her sleep and ambitions after birth.
All without any expectation that a newborn can pay her back. Her only joy is watching that child finally stand on its own 2 feet.
That is the essence of divine mercy. The system doesn't need our taxes or prayers to survive. The Deen is designed unilaterally to nurture humanity.
To bring us from vulnerable infancy to independent maturity.
Exactly.
And to tie it all together, we have to bring this mother metaphor back to the shield, to the firmness.
Because at first glance, fierce, unyielding teeth seem totally contradictory to soft maternal mercy.
But they aren't. Think about a mother with a toddler trying to play near an open fire.
She doesn't negotiate.
Right. She doesn't use softness and say, okay, touch the fire a little bit so I don't seem mean.
No, she snatches the kid away with absolute firmness.
Even if the kid screams and thinks she's a tyrant in that moment. The boundary is absolute, precisely because she loves the child and wants it to survive.
The firmness of the divine law operates on that exact principle.
It's an impenetrable shield against the exploiters. It creates a safe environment for the vulnerable to survive and grow. The boundary isn't a cage, it's a womb.
An environment of absolute protection.
Wow. As we wrap up this incredibly dense framework, you really have to apply it to your own life.
It definitely forces some introspection.
Yeah. How do you conceptualize the non-negotiable boundaries you face? Do you default to that penalty mindset?
Viewing them as irritating cages.
Exactly. Or can you reframe them as the necessary teeth of a shield, protecting your long-term growth from your short-term impulses?
And if you're a leader, are you providing that fierce protection for your team or family?
Right. Are you keeping toxic elements out with clear boundaries? And are you providing that psychological income? In a world obsessed with bottom lines, a little genuine, principle-based appreciation goes a long way.
It really transforms a resentful transaction into a community.
We started today examining how we conflate vague kindness with compassion. But true mercy requires a shield. It requires predictability to protect the weak.
It needs teeth.
We've built the brains, and today we forge the shield of firmness. But what happens next? Next time, in Part 16, we move from the shield to the spearhead. The text leaves off by mentioning the vanguard, the first forerunners. Who are these early adopters who take these firm laws and actually build the new world while everyone else is still making articulate excuses? That's coming up on our next Deep Dive.